I looked him in the eye and I just said, Wazi nifta. Over life, you hope that Hashem gives you the feeling of stability and security in your life to be able to get into a space where you can really be real and raw with the pain to try and process it. I remember sitting in the car with a kid soon after his father passed away, and he said to me, Aaron, when will I feel normal again? And I just said to him, I don't know yet. Here locally, not so long ago, a kid's got a mouthful from someone in the middle of Shachris, and he just pulled off the talis and plonked down the Amud and walked away. Slowly you get used to a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday without Daddy, and then comes Shabbos, and his place is at the top of the table, and there's just no one sitting there. And every time you glance there, you don't want to glance there, but you glance there, it reminds you. And then after a time, you get used to Shabbos, as weird as it is to say you do. And then comes Yom Tov. There's a poem I wrote a few years ago expressing my feelings, It's called Daddy, If I Could See You One More Time. And, the poem goes on to say, I just want one more hug. So, of course, I'd love to bring him back and have one more hug. And Mitzvah Hashem we will with Mashiach very soon.
I want to go back to March 2024. I was sitting in a cafe not too far from where we are right now. It was a regular quiet morning, middle of the week. I look across the restaurant and I see Rabbi Aron Litwin sitting in the far corner. A few minutes later, a young schoolboy strides in his uniform. This was a regular school morning, joins you at your table. Coffees are ordered. And it struck me that what I was witnessing was Mekimi in action. A moment in time for a child who had recently lost his father to experience normality, to experience the ability to sit down for a coffee with a fatherly figure. Take me back to your own childhood and to where this all started.
Wow, so first of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate. And that's a beautiful moment. You kind of caught me off guard there because I didn't know where you're going to go with this, and it's I'm reminiscing of moments like that, and I actually remember that specific moment. A gorgeous kid. Actually, I met his mother incidentally 2 days ago, and I haven't seen the boy now in a month or two, and she just said to me, he's flying, he's doing so well. And it was such a nice moment. It was just what I wanted to hear. You want to be a support for them as long as they need and as much as they need, but you never want to be there too much. You want them to fly, and to hear that it's, it happens to be the person you're referring to is flying. It was real nachas. It was a special moment. Going back to my childhood, I grew up in, I think, a healthy home in Golders Green, blessed to have Baruch Hashem, an incredible family, incredible father, incredible mother. I guess the part you want me to fast forward to is when I was 17 years old, I was in yeshiva in Gateshead. It was a Friday morning, and I remember it so vividly. These things stay with you forever. I actually was learning with a very close friend of mine. His name's Meir Simchatzan. He's someone who we keep up still today, even though he doesn't live in the country. We speak very regularly. We were learning in a very quiet bismedrash. No one actually knew where we were. The call had come through that something was serious, and they asked people, where's Aron Litwin? And there was this whole search party, which I was completely oblivious to. And I remember in the middle of this learning session, a random face popped up at the window, like by the door window. And I was like, that's so random. What is this fellow doing there? But you don't think much of it. Like afterwards, you put the puzzle together. And a short time later, another face popped up. And I was like getting curious. And he said, he just came in and he said, Rabbi Whitler is outside. He wants to speak to you. And I remember Rabbi Leib took me into his car. And he said to me, your father's very ill and he's asked for you to come home for Shabbos. So I looked him in the eye and I just said, Wazi nifta. And I remember he's got no problem to hold a gaze, to hold a stare. And he looked back at me and he said, this is all I know. But I think deep down in that moment, I just knew already. And I was so eager to know what had happened. I wanted to know. I didn't want the suspense. So I said, what are we doing? He said, we're going to take you to your room and we're going to pack a suitcase. So I said, oh, do I pack for 7 days? And I was sort of saying to him, just tell me what had happened. And he just smiled and said, pack what you think makes sense. And to be honest, I found out later that my mother had actually asked him and told him that she wants to be the one to tell me, which, as painful as it is always the right thing to do. I spoke to a lady 2 days ago who told me that after her husband had passed away, she didn't know what to do, and someone had given her this piece of advice. And she says it was so hard, but it was so the right thing to do. She said being there, being present in that moment is so important. So I went to my room, and I remember just piling a bunch of stuff into a case. And I said, right, I want to go to the station. And he said that it's important that I travel with someone else. And I just wanted to go home. The next train, I'll still remember this friend of mine at the time, Yehuda Geli. He just said, I'll come with you. And he literally, in his shirt sleeves, just came. He had nothing. I remember he had to borrow his brother's suit on Shabbos and someone's tefillin on Sunday. While I was in the train station, in Newcastle train station, the whole time I was trying to call through to my mother, my brother-in-law, like, what's going on? I couldn't get through in this train station. I got through to my mother. And I just remember that moment. I remember standing next to one of these big pillars. Well, it's going back 20 years and it feels like yesterday. And I remember my mother saying to me, remember the exact words were, Daddy's collapsed this morning and we have a levaya this afternoon. And I remember just, I don't know, like a deep cry came out, like an anguish, like a very painful cry. I remember a staff member came right over from the station. Is everything concerned, whatever? And Rabbi Whitler was there, just, told them to give me the space. I remember just standing there for a few minutes, just in a lot of pain. And then I just, pulled myself away and said, right, we've got to get home. And then Yehuda came on the train with me. We went home, and it was just the beginning of a new life. It was so different in so many ways from that first Shabbos. The Levaya wasn't actually on Friday. They did something so unique, and I've dealt with so many similar situations today where I've never actually seen this, but they agreed to give us the body, the guf, on the condition it doesn't get buried till Sunday when the coroner would sign it off. So a neighbor of ours at the time, Mendel creditor, Mendel and Bela, they have like a sort of a garage, an annex near the house. And that's where they had the body over Shabbos. It was a really weird Shabbos. I remember loads of people came and did shmira. I remember going in and myself and humming some Shabbos shmiras, and it was actually a beautiful Shabbos. I had two of my sisters who lived in the UK, and their husbands came for Shabbos, my brothers-in-law. I will say always that I feel very blessed. I really, really have incredible family support. It was a crazy Shabbos in the sense that I think at the time they gave this little leaflet of halachas. And I remember reading there, one is not permitted to cry on Shabbos. And I remember telling my mother and my sisters, we're not going to cry on Shabbos. We really didn't cry much on Shabbos because, and then I remember Matzah Shabbos going in to where my father's body was and sort of letting out so much emotion. But there was a certain power to that Shabbos that's stayed with me forever. I still remember the songs we sang, and it was also really, really weird for me because I have two older brothers, and they're often there and supportive, and they were stuck in Israel. They couldn't get back in time for Shabbos, so it was weird being thrust into the spotlight in that sense. Probably the first time in my life I had a different role to play. It's something I see actually with so many families today. You can have a 9-year-old who suddenly becomes the man at home. Suddenly it's a huge responsibility. Oh, there's so many different memories if you tell me where you want to go with
You were
this.
taken by complete shock. There was no build-up or sense that something may come to you at some point. I suppose that compounded things immeasurably.
100%. It leaves its trauma. There's no question till today. We kind of have this thing in the family that you can't miscall someone too many times without sending a text.
Wow.
100%, although I think so. I mean, it's funny, it's a discussion we often have with the kids, and we often talk about, what's worse, sudden loss? Some of these kids, I'm thinking of one specific case where they watched their mother become so unwell. I can't imagine having had to go through that. I can't imagine what that must be like, davening your heart out and then losing a mother or any parent, watching a parent suffer so much. I have to say, in some way, I guess everyone's given what they can handle, but in a sense, I can't imagine. I don't know how these kids do it. I don't know how don't know how they do it. So many brave, incredible kids I have the privilege to see. But your specific question reminds me of one episode. There's an incredible organization in America called Links. They put on this Shabbaton for the kids every year, boys Shabbos and a girls Shabbos. I love to take as many British kids as I can, encourage them to come, And I remember running a session there. I think the session was even titled Sudden Loss. There was a kid who came, a gorgeous Hasidic kid. I remember he had blonde payas. It became apparent his mother passed away from cancer. And I say cancer. I often prefer to say Anamachla, but funnily enough, a lot of the kids get upset when I say Anamachla. They're like, say cancer. My mother, actually, it's another part of my story. She was actually diagnosed. She found that, I think she got the initial results just after the Shiva of my father. I remember when I came back for the Shloshim, 30 days after my father was nifta, was when she sat me down by the kitchen table. And she told me, I remember exactly where I sat. Literally, it was like my kitchen table. My home was like falling apart. My father was gone. And she like sat me down. It was no one seemed to be around. She obviously found a quiet moment. And she said to me, I was like, what? And then she looked me in the eye. I can't recommend this or whatever. My mother's an amazing person. And she said, I promise you, I'm not going to die. And Baruch Hashem, she didn't. But I don't know how
and I didn't realize you were going to bring it up. But what did you tap into? I mean, I can hear now your pain is still very much alive. At that moment in time, your world had just collapsed. To get a piece of news like that so close in time, like what were you leaning on? What was your infrastructure at that point to even begin to comprehend that?
I think the honest answer is survival. I will say I feel lucky to have had have an amazing family around, but I think it's just survival. And I'll tell you this, I really feel that what we experience with so many of the kids, and often you see things in yourself, is you kind of, and I'm happy to circle back to it later, I wasn't trying to knock you off course, I was just speaking freely, but I find that so often human beings are incredible. Hashem created us with so much resilience, and the kids go into survival. And actually people think, oh, they're fine. And really, you go into this cocoon of self-protection. And I'm happy to share, I went for grief therapy as recently as 3 years ago. And I think over life, you hope that Hashem gives you the feeling of stability and security in your life to be able to get into a space where you can really be real and raw with the pain to try and process it. But I think the brutally honest answer to your question is just survival instinct of just wanting to just be okay, be normal and get by. Hold that pain in a space somewhere away, and being able to hopefully open that box when the time is safer.
You mentioned about your therapy. I know that you mentioned in a different interview a couple of years ago that when you were unpacking, and I suppose your therapist was giving you the space to feel safe and express how you were feeling, your therapist mentioned to you that the level of intensity that you're experiencing grief would make one think that you lost your father maybe a year ago, even though at the time it was 15 plus years. You responded back to him, look, I haven't always felt that way, but if I'm feeling that way now, I then need to express that now. What can you tell us about the ability of being in touch with one's feelings and learning how to allow oneself to be honest, to process, and to be true to those feelings at any stage of that journey?
It's a great question. I am a believer in being real, and I think that it's the only way I know. I get it. There's situations when you have to be brave, say certain things, but it's the way I interact with everyone. It's the way I've lived my life, just being real. I really like that therapist that I was working with at the time. I think maybe he was trying to help me heal quickly. I think he meant well. A lovely person. But I really think that's so important. I think a person needs to feel the ability to be real. And I get it. In day-to-day life, you can't always have that. The nature of life is you've got to get up, daven, get to work, or whatever your life brings you. If it's for a kid, you've got to get to school. And with the kids, we work so hard to encourage them to maintain that sense of normality. But at the same time, to create opportunities and spaces for when they need to be real. I think Carl Jung, who's from the very fathers of psychology, he once said that emotion is a fluid, and when you experience it, it can pass through. And I feel that with my therapist hat on as well, but with a human being, with my neshama hat on, I think Rahman al-Libabai, Hashem wants our heart. I think healing only comes. You can only grow when you're being real, when you acknowledge what you're feeling, and that's what I was saying. I was saying I need to feel this pain now, and I actually think it's such a powerful sign. It's a sign that I was in such a safe place that I could just feel the pure rawness and intensity of that moment. Perhaps I hadn't felt it till then. Perhaps I hadn't allowed myself to really. I remember sitting in the car with a kid soon after his father passed away, and he said to me, Aron, when will I feel normal again? And I just said to him, I don't know yet. Obviously, Baruch Hashem, I'm living life. I'd like to think I try to maximize every day and every opportunity. But I think a person has to feel safe. I wish upon anyone listening, whatever your scar is, everyone's got different wounds, different struggles. And I wish for everyone to be able to feel safe enough to be real with whatever it was or is that's hurting them. And so too in the joy, to be able to experience joy and celebration in a beautiful day. I really believe every minute is a miracle. In my line of life, you see that every day. It definitely encourages you to make better choices. So I think being able to be real with oneself is the very bedrock of life.
Very powerful. I know we're talking about circumstances that are far from ideal, but from the experience you've got, and we're going to come to the work and unpack it all in stages, what would the ideal circumstance look like for a child or a young adult who is going through this experience? Like if you were to be able to point at an infrastructure and say, if a child's going to come out of this experience strong, healthy, intact, this is what the surrounding family, community, educators need to understand in order to ensure that the pain doesn't compound to a stage due to poor grief management, which can result in something far worse?
A very loaded question in the sense of there's so many angles and facets to it. And I will say also, every situation is unique. I was dealing recently with a situation where someone just said they've got it all perfect. They've done it all right. I think they've done incredibly well and trying to support them as well. But I don't know if there's a one size fits all. I'll zone in on one element, which I do think it's very much what Mekimi's built on, and definitely a very core component, which I believe in. There's so many angles, but I will say I believe that rather than thrusting the child into therapy, and I say this as a therapist, or rather than trying to give them clinical support immediately, I'm a big believer in finding someone, ideally someone who may have known the kid previously. You don't always want to bring in fresh faces, but if you need to, then in most cases you often do need to bring in a fresh face. But I'm a big believer in big buddies, in a mentor. Have someone who's gonna be there, and obviously they should be trained on a level, and obviously safeguarding, and that's obvious, that goes without saying. But have someone who's going to be a big brother, a big sister to that person, who can take them out for, if the girl wants a nice coffee, or if the boy just needs someone to offload to, or talk, or just chill, not talk. Sometimes they don't want to. But have that stability at least weekly, and it's a space where they know that they can just be themselves. And that person is someone who will be aware of many nuances in their life. They'll say 1 second, they can always report back and say, I feel now they're starting to go into a bit of a depression. Maybe they do need some clinical support. Or it could be anything. This kid's class are doing an Avos Avonim session on Sunday, and actually he's just telling me he's got no one to go with, and the Rebbe hasn't thought about it. It could be anything. It could be the school, they're going on a class trip and they're planning to do a musical evening. They haven't thought that, they're not listening to music. It could be anything. But I believe in having a core anchor for each child is a very, very powerful component. Not so clinical, more natural, more genuine, more pure. And I think that's a very core component. There's so many elements, and
you're saying creating that anchor, creating that bedrock of support on a consistent basis over time, it will be there as a safety net to catch when things can start to frail.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that's invaluable. There's so many elements and so many angles I could talk about, and if you want to go somewhere, I'm happy to. But I think that is, as
an umbrella idea, that's very powerful. That's really, really powerful. I want to go back to your journey, sort of where we continue, just to that point, that Motzei Shabbos Sunday. I know when it comes to Tahara, there's different menhogim, different communities, there's lots of different processes. I actually listened recently to an episode by Rabbi David Bashevkin where he did a series on loss, and he interviewed two ladies, a mother and a daughter, both who had experienced loss, and both joined their local Tahara. And it was just mind-opening to hear these different ideas from different communities and different menhogim. You wanted to see your father one last time before the Kavura, and the opportunity presented itself to you. Can you walk us through that moment? What it meant for you to process your pain and the ability for you to say goodbye in a way that mattered to you?
Yeah, I can still see that image in my head. You've done your homework. But no, it's for me, it's a beautiful moment. I keep it in my heart. I can literally see the image in my head. I'm just taking it in while I'm speaking to you. So I didn't know, I wasn't familiar with any, death or dying at the time and what goes on. I had no idea. My father was my best friend. I miss him. I just miss him. I know I don't mean to say friend and like pals. I had immense respect, and I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I was chutzpahdig, or something like that. We really loved each other. I just loved spending time with him. We just loved each other's company. On every Sunday we would go to B&Q or Homebase, like a DIY store, and do a project at home. And I think that's what I miss most of anything, because that connection is something that I miss a lot. I just wanted to say goodbye. Funnily enough, the last time I saw him alive, it was really weird. I was on the way to go back to yeshiva. It was like about 3 weeks before he was niftar. And I remember leaving the house. Now, normally he would take us everywhere. Like, till today, when I come back on the train station, I could be coming from a trip to London, back here to Manchester, or flying. And I'm always like, I still almost like poke my head out thinking, is he there? Like, because he would pick everyone up. It was known, like, Daddy will be there. For some reason, he couldn't take me to yeshiva, to the train station. I don't know why. I remember he was by the door, and I went back. I went to give him a hug. He was by the door, and I went over to give him a big hug. And for some reason, we got emotional, and we both, little tear, no idea why. And I remember walking up the path and going into my brother-in-law's car. He was taking me. And then for some reason, we both glanced at each other. I turned around, I went back down the path, and we had another hug. I have no idea why. It wasn't something I did. And I remember we held each other close. It was like a good squeezy hug. And we cried. I don't even know why. I mean, I guess the neshama knows. It does say in Chazals that 30 days before the neshama can feel. So that was a goodbye in some level. Once I'd come back, I wanted to see him. I was perhaps a little curious, but I think more than anything, I just wanted to see him one more time, to see that he's okay. If that's, as weird as that sounds, I'm just speaking freely. And I asked a few people, around, and they were like, ugh, are you crazy? It's unheard of. The Gemara says, Al testakel b'fnei hameis, you're not allowed to look at a dead person. So it's not allowed, it's unheard, it's never done. So I presumed and then I called over my brother-in-law, Tzviki. He's a massive help in so many ways. Been through his own incredible journey of loss. He lost both his parents by the time he was 21. Incredible person, how he soldiered on in life and supported so many of us. I said to him, look, I'm only losing my father once. I'd like to go and see what happens there. And he kind of knows me that I'm like, I'll try. And he went to have a word with the Chevra, and they said that there is a minhag that the sons put earth on the body, earth from Eretz Yisrael. And you say the pasuk, v'chiper ad mosai amai. And he actually arranged, he said, yeah, you can go. And then my brothers kind of said, if you're going, we'll come along, as if, I think they were also happy to come, but they wanted to support me. I remember we went, and he said to Mati, you put earth on the eyes, and Chaim you do on the hands, and Aaron you do on the feet. And they gave us this little earth. And when they were slightly trying to create a gap that the earth could go where the eye is, the white cloth, part of the tachrichim that covered the face, it slipped off. And I saw the face. And I have to say, he just looked so peaceful. There was like a smile. It gave me so much comfort to see. It was beautiful. I was worried for him as well. I love him, I miss him. I wanted to make sure he's okay, so to speak. And it just gave me so much comfort. I still think of it now, and I think he's okay, wherever he is, hopefully by the Keseh HaKavod. And it was a very comforting moment to see him smiling. And I will add, I have spoken to people who have extreme trauma from seeing, and therefore we don't recommend it. I was lucky, and I know others who have been lucky, but I know others who have extreme trauma from what they've seen. I was recently dealing with a case, and I spoke to the head of the Chevra Kadisha specifically for the family who wanted to go, not see because it's unheard of, but and he in his wise way, they speak in riddles. The Chevra Kadisha, he gave me to understand it was a case where it wasn't wise. So this was my experience. Everyone has a different experience. It wasn't intentional, but that's the reality. And I'd like to think, regardless of what the body looks like, I'd wish for everyone to be able to have an image in their head of their parents being in a place where they're smiling and they're in a safe, beautiful place with the Shekhinah. I wish that image, whether it's realistic or imaginative, on every person, because it is very comforting. There's a funny anecdote that happened then as well. Just if we're going through that, when after putting the earth, we also knocked in these pegs, which it was really nice because they told us leave the pegs of the lid of the coffin of the Aron. They said leave it a little bit up, and I was like, why? Why do we? And they said because when Tchias HaMesim happens, it should be easy for the body to be able to come up. It was beautiful in a way. And then they told us to tear Kriya. And what happens is, I don't know, I'm smiling, I'll tell you why. It's a very weird moment. They were looking at us. They were the head of the Chevra Kadisha. I think he was an old Yekasha Yid. He was so unimpressed. Basically, they tell you to make the bracha of Dayan HaEmes and then to tear Kriya. So my oldest brother, Mati, made the bracha and tore Kriya. And then my second brother, Chaim, he made the bracha. And Chaim's very particular. He does mitzvahs in the most beautiful way. And he made the bracha and he tore Kriya. And it tore a nice amount, plenty, if you ask me. But he decided it wasn't enough. So he pulled his jacket again and almost half the jacket fell off. We just burst out laughing, all of us, giggling our heads off. My father was just there. I think he was happy. We were giggling. But this guy was staring at us and like fuming. You're by your father's body saying Dayan HaEmes and you're... it was a crazy story, but I've learned since then that often you go to shivas, there's awkwardness and people giggle. In psychology, the hysteria of giggling and crying are very closely related. So yeah, just to share that anecdote.
Fascinating. It just sounds like a Litwin moment. I mean, I can just, I don't know all of you properly, but I can just imagine it happening. But that's really, it's really moving.
It was. Yeah, just say very briefly that that after the shiva visits later at night, when we would sit around as a family, they were very healing moments. Just being with a family, and it's why I always say I feel so lucky to have a close, good family. There's so many people who go through this pain and they don't have, especially some of these really younger families. You can have an 8-year-old who's the oldest at home. It may not be many uncles, or they may not be close with their uncles or aunties, and it's so much deeper.
That shiva moment, that anticlimax that goes from that busy hub of the 7 days to that immediate, what now? Where do we go? What's the next step of this journey? You just mentioned your experience. There was moments of healing, the family being together, but for others who haven't got that infrastructure, where do they go? What is that next stage looking like for them? And is there a roadmap they can follow to try and transition into the next phase of their journey, which is probably quite lonely? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I'll say even for me, with the gorgeous family, people had their lives and places to go back to. The week after is the worst week. It's the worst week. I remember vomiting, just in bed, feeling down. I remember the house just being dark. I don't even know why. I'm sure the lights were on, but it just, I guess, figuratively felt dark. It was black. It was the week after was very heavy. It was very, very heavy. Even with everything positive I've said, it was very, very difficult. It was there was no distraction. The shiva was an incredible distraction, and you're just left with the reality. And that's difficult. So to come to answer your question, I don't know if there's a specific roadmap, but it's at that point normally where Mekimi would reach out. Either a family member would reach out to us, or we would reach out. It's at that point or a little after. We don't like to come in right away unless we're needed. In some cases we are, and we're requested, to come in earlier, and we'll do what's requested. But really, we come in then, and that's a time when, the busyness, the hub of activity is calming down, and that's when the real journey of grief starts. And I can't say a roadmap because everyone's got their journey. And speaking to someone recently, we were working with a family in the first year and it was just so hard. And I asked an almana, a lady who lost her husband, I asked her to reach out with permission to a lady to speak to her because I just felt what better support. And she just told her that there aren't any shortcuts to that first patch. And I loved what she said. There aren't so many shortcuts. I'd like to think that as Mekimi, we can step in and give as much support as possible from our end, which we try to, and that could be setting them up with their mentors. It could be giving them experiences. It could be talking things through, answering questions, trying to help set them up with different supports to oversee, financial responsibilities and etc. in so many angles. But there isn't a specific answer I can give.
There's a book unwritten by Rabbi Aron Litwin about the Oval's journey of going to the Omad. I think you wrote in a brief hypnosis to the Tribune very shortly after you lost your father. What can you tell us about that patch? Because, I go to different shuls, we hop in, and sometimes you get to a shul, there's somebody at the Omad, he's either going quick, always going slow and struggling with the words, each coming from their own different backgrounds. But collectively, there's usually a minion of people who need to get out the door by a certain time. What did you experience?
I think it's not just a book by me. I had the privilege to run a session that was titled Harassed at the Omad. And there was about 60 kids. Yeah, 60 kids in the room. And I said, who's not been harassed at the Omad? One kid out of 60. We're talking about young Simon put the hand up, which I think is crazy. I'll tell you, last week I spoke to someone who runs our boys' trips. And he told me he was in shul and he saw a guy going over to a young 15-year-old Yossam davening at the Omad. Last week, we're in 2025 or whatever, and he told me he just gave him a piece of his mind. I don't like to use the word at all angry much. I hope I'm not an angry person in any way, but it does definitely get under my skin when I see it. I'll share with you. Recently, I was davening at the Omad. It was my grandmother's yahrzeit. I think it was my grandmother's yahrzeit. She didn't leave any sons. So I was davening at the Omad for her neshama. And it was literally, I'm a grown man. I'd like to think I've got a healthy self-esteem. I found it traumatic. And obviously I've got my traumas from being, but I know many grown-ups who tell me they don't want to go to the Omad, and it's people come over and they just bully you. I could give so many examples of this, and it really angers me, because how not everyone's the most intuitive person, but come on, just a kid. You know what it takes to go to the Omad? Do you know how much bravery it takes? You know how difficult it is? Just to me, it's such basic intuition, and to see it still happening today, it does trigger me. It does make my blood rush. Here locally, not so long ago, a kid got a mouthful from someone in the middle of Shachris, and he just pulled off the talis and plonked it on the Amud and walked away. Wow. Literally, not far from where we're sitting now. Not everyone gets to hear the story. Sometimes someone's in a minyan, does see, doesn't see. I would just beg people, never say anything, please. If you're worried about the word being wrong or whatever, go speak to your local Orthodox Rav. There almost isn't the right thing to say other than thank you and well done and kol hakavod. People need encouragement and support. That there really isn't. I don't know. I'm speaking softly. It boggles my mind, actually.
Hopefully, this can create some awareness.
Yeah, it boggles my mind. People and yeah, there's different angles to it, but I'll say one anecdote is that I like to say something that whoever's listening who is struggling can hear some. Someone once told me that if you want to know you're going at the right speed, you need people to be telling you. He said, if everyone's telling you you're going too fast, maybe you're going too fast. If everyone's telling you you're going too slow, maybe you're going too slow. He said, if you have both sides of things, then you know you're going well. So I once had someone who came over to me and he said, you're going too fast. So I said to him, oh, thank you so much. And he was startled. And I'm not really a cynical person. I just feel this is an area where I probably should have turned around and just said, look, I hear it's hard being at the Omad. Cut me some slack. I'm doing my best. But I didn't, okay? So I said to him, thank you so much. He's startled. And he's like, what do you mean? So I said, look, to be honest, someone told me that if you want to know you're going well, you need people telling you you're going too fast and too slow. I said, before you, a guy came over and he said to me, you're going too slow. So I thought maybe I'm going too slow. And then you come to me and go, oh, thank you. I know I'm going to do the perfect job, But it really frustrates me. It really deeply frustrates me. And I have to say, please, if you see someone saying something to a kid at the Amud, even an adult at the Amud, stop them. There's no right thing to say. If you really mean it sincerely, wait a day or two and approach them after that in the right way, in an intuitive way, not at the Yomad, and say something. You literally put a kid off. I can tell you, I have kids who have told me they're not davening anymore because they just can't handle it. And it's such a shame. Like what a davening, what a Kaddish does for the neshama is incredible. So, it's really not worth it.
Big responsibility on the public. Yeah, I think it would be remiss of me if we didn't spend a few moments letting the audience understand who your father was and what the relationship you've expressed. But for those who didn't know him, what can we learn?
Wow, it's hard to describe that in a few short words. It's funny, I made a little clip for my kids on his yard site a few years back. It was quite hard for me. My kids were like, "Tell me, Daddy, what was Saba like?" It made me quite emotional when they asked, because I'd love them to be able to have met him. It's its own stage of grief. It's when you have the kids and it's a void. They don't have that grandfather. They don't have that experience of feeling his warmth, his love, his magic. And it literally just popping into my mind now, how he just wanted to make people feel good. That was his life's mission. I'm thinking of a boy now who didn't have much of a home. His parents got divorced and he was a lodger. My father, whenever he would send a package to my brother in yeshiva, he would send for that boy also. He was that kind of guy. So my kids would ask me, "Daddy, what was Saba like?" And I did this little clip for them, just put some images to it and I recorded it for them to be able to see. And I told a story. It's not a story about my father, but I think it captures what he was like. The story was of a young boy who was the farmer's son, and he was all excited. He'd worked the whole winter on the potato crop, that the potatoes should grow well. And he was all excited for the day when he could take it to the market and be the guy who's selling the potatoes, be this macho, big man. He'd matured. And finally the day comes after the long winter, you could dramatize the story, and he's finally able to sell those potatoes. And he gets there, and a man finally comes to his stall, and he says, "Potatoes," and he prepares him these beautiful potatoes, and he puts them in a bag, and he says to him, "That's £4.50, whatever it is for the potatoes." And the man, instead of giving him the money, he just passes straight over him and gives the money to his father. And this kid's like, his whole world just collapsed. I've worked for these potatoes. I am serving you. Give me that respect. And there's a guy who sees what's going on from the side, and he doesn't need potatoes, but he comes over and he goes over to the kid and he says, "Are you able to serve me potatoes?" And he gets those potatoes, and then he makes sure to pay the kid and take the change from the kid and says, "Wow, that was quick how you got the change." And I love that story because that's just what he was like. He was always looking for a way, without recognition, just to make people happy, to feel good inside. He did incredible things. It was so nice, actually. Just 3 days ago, I was at a wedding here in Manchester, and a Yid, Mordechai Eisenthal, who came over to me and said, last week in Daf Yomi, they're learning Kodshim, all about the Beis HaMikdash. We're Kohanim. My father was always ready for tomorrow to go to the Beis HaMikdash, and he said, it was a Geschmacka daf, and he said, someone said, "Oh, Rabbi Rach would have loved this." Wow. It was so nice for me to hear. It's 20 years later, and people in his share still say he loved his learning. He had 4 or 5 learning kaviyas a day. He was a Hatzalah member. He loved to do chesed. He was always looking out there for people, an open home where everyone was welcome, so many things. But I just think at the core, and he was knowledgeable about so many interesting parts of Torah. And I'll say one thing, he was always so positive. I sometimes wish I had his positivity. He didn't have an easy life either, and he was always with a smile, and it wasn't a fake smile. Yeah, he's my hero. It's funny, my sister was saying to me the other day, "Do you still think about what Daddy would say when you do things?" I was like, every day.
Wow.
Every day.
Wow. That's really beautiful. At what point did you decide to go professional with your desire, your trajectory of life to help people, and obviously now through managing grief, but professionally to go qualified psychotherapist? What prompted you to go down that route, and what did that journey look like for you?
So it's a good question. I remember on the last date with my wife, I'll just say I always wanted to work with people, to share people's journey with them. I don't like saying help people because I don't look at it that way. I always say to people, if someone comes into my room, they always say, "This is the journey." I was given a mashal, an analogy, and I say, "It's your life, and I appreciate you letting me into your car, or the car of your life, but I'm in the passenger seat, you're driving. So, thanks for letting me in, and I'm going to enjoy the rides." I really feel I believe in people's power to help themselves. I really do. But I always wanted to work with people. I was at a time in my life where I wore many different hats. Like I say, I remember when I was my last date with my wife. My wife comes from a beautiful home, very steeped in Torah for many years, authentic Torah values. And I was kind of a little inhibited before we got engaged because I thought she maybe is expecting me to just be in Kollel for the next 20 years. So I remember saying to her, I just want to clarify that I want to do something meaningful with my life, but I just want you to be aware I may not stay in Kollel for 20 years. So she's like, well, what do you want to do?
Think fast.
Yeah, think fast. So I said to her, it's funny, I said to her, I don't know, some sort of maybe being a cool rabbi or, therapist, like helping people in that way, which was funny because I did work as a rabbi for a good, the best part of a decade in Seed, amazing years with amazing memories. And at the same time, I'm blessed to have a private practice as a psychotherapist. But nothing gives me more pleasure than working with kids, and not kids, but all human beings, all ages. I've had the privilege to work with people from age 6 to 75. For me, to be with someone and watch them realize the potential they have and watch them conquer a challenge they've had, to be there at that moment or over the journey is the most satisfying. I think it's something I've always wanted to do. I remember writing an English essay when I was like 13, and it was about parenting skills or something. My mother's a psychologist, so it's in the family. But I've always wanted to do that. And it's important to me to live a life of meaning. I think perhaps the greatest message of losing my father and working with the people I do is to want to live a life of meaning. No one knows how long they have in this world. Every minute's a privilege and a bracha, a blessing. And I think the greatest gift is to be able to live a meaningful life.
That's really, really powerful. Very beautiful. There was a point in time when it became apparent to you that what you were experiencing, what may have seemed to be pain or sadness, was in fact anger. You mentioned before you're not an angry person, but you were experiencing was an experience of anger. Can you take us to that moment of clarity and explain what we need to understand about these two emotions and what recognizing what you were really experiencing did for you in your journey to heal?
Oh, it's a deep one. Yeah, I don't always like going there. I guess that's the truth. I was really upset, and upset is obviously a cloak word for angry. I was really upset with Hashem for taking him away. I was scared to think that or voice that because I know in my heart HaKadosh Baruch Hu only does good things and he only loves us. This is something that took a lot of working on. And when someone enlightened me to a beautiful story from Reb Nachman, it was Avram Yishia Lev told me a beautiful story from Reb Nachman, and he told me that it was basically a mashal that this father was driving irresponsibly and he crashed the car because his driving was irresponsible, very irresponsibly, and his son was in the back and his son was hit badly and went into a coma. The father felt so guilty and he rushed the son to to call the hospital, and he took the best doctors, and he said, I'm not leaving his bed until he's better. And the nurses were amazed because the first day, 2 days, 3 days, it's normal people to be there a week, 2 weeks. He wouldn't leave. And the family were like, we need you at home. We need to go back to the office. I am not leaving his bedside until he's better. And he brought the best doctors from abroad, and he was there for months, 3-4 months. And the nurses had never seen such dedication, such devotion. They were completely gobsmacked, startled. And the guy, basically after 4 months, one morning, Baruch Hashem, his son opens his eyes. And he looks over to where his father is and he starts saying, Daddy, look what you did to me. I've been stuck here for 4 months in a coma because you were driving irresponsibly. And he's having a go, shouting at his father. And the nurses come over and they say, listen. You can't speak to him like that. You don't realize he's not left your bedside in 4 months. He's paid millions of pounds to bring the best professionals. You can't scream at him like that. And the father says to the nurse, leave him. I don't care. I don't care what he's saying. I'm just happy that he's talking to me. I'm happy he's talking. And he said, Hashem's so much bigger than your little anger you might be feeling. Tell him about it. It was a really powerful moment because davening is hard for so many people. I'll share something beautiful I just saw the other day from Shlomi Ehrlich, Rabbi Shlomi Ehrlich in the Kesher Nafshi Rav. He said, he started off, he said it in Yiddish, he says, have you davened? And he goes, and then, have you benched? And he said, did I trigger you just now? And I've said this over to so many people, everyone relates. And he goes, Of course I triggered you, because davening you associate with having to be in a space and nodding, shaking around for a bit of time and not knowing, not understanding what's going on and not connecting, Of course I triggered you. And davening is something people struggle with. And he said, how about try this next time you want to tell your kids to come to shul? Say, let's go ask Hashem that, we should have a lot of success today. We should make lots of money, have lots of friends. Let's go ask. Let's go bait. Let's go beg. Or let's go thank Hashem. We had a great time. We had a great outing, a great holiday. Let's just go say thank you, And it's a mindset. And this, for me, it released that mindset of that I had to hold it in. And I felt as soon as I was able to express that and realize that, I can tell him, Hashem, I'm really angry that you took him away. In a real sense, to say that. And I think when I was able to say that and feel that, it let so much go. And I think Hashem was more than happy to hear that from me. I hope so, because it only brought me closer. And I'll say it's been a real journey. Like I say, I try to be really genuine and real. It's not always been, and it's not always every day. Every day is a journey, but it's something that I work on. Coming back to that very first point, if you're able to be true with what you're really feeling, Hashem's happy to hear everything. He can handle it, whichever space it is that you want to share it. If it's not in a davening setting or talking to Hashem setting, to a human or wherever it is. But I would encourage people to try and just allow themselves to be as real as possible with their pain.
That is so powerful. I want to go into the work of Mekimi. Yeah. The route of action that you take when a family is referred to your services. Walk us through the process of how the family is onboarded, profiled, and how your team identifies and delivers its plan of care.
Mekimi is a real privilege to be involved in. It's something that really started out literally so grassroots. It started out by one favor of a fellow therapist asking me to take on a kid who'd lost a father, who couldn't connect with any of the other people that he'd seen. And within a short time, Baruch Hashem, he was in a much better place. And then when connecting with this kid, I got to hear from his mother what's going on at home. And realizing that there was so many things missing. People often ask, what do you do at Mekimi? And I say, if the person's a mother or a father, I say, define the job role of a mother or a father. Now, we're never replacing anyone, but really we're trying to help in that void, which is infinite. It's absolutely infinite. And yeah, we have a structure. I'll talk you through what we do and how we go about things in different areas where we have stronger core programming. But ultimately, Mekimi is about making sure that every kid realize there's somewhere in the world, someone that they can call when they need. Whether it's someone who's about to go into Gaza and fight, and he's feeling scared, and he doesn't know who to call, and he'll call someone from Mekimi and say, I'm feeling afraid. Whether it's someone who, we've had the privilege, someone who calls all excited, and we don't always get happy calls. So like, what is it? I passed my driving test, and I'll say, that's such a nice call, how come you made to call me? He said, who else should I call? And it's about being there. And when a 9-year-old boy suddenly becomes the man at home, or a 14-year-old girl suddenly becomes the mummy, they're incredible kids. I'm just thinking of a family where the oldest girl at home just took on so many responsibilities, the cooking, the washing, the cleaning, while juggling her schoolwork. I heard the most beautiful thing recently. She shared that every Friday when she comes to her room for Shabbos to get ready, on her bed, her father puts a tub of jellies and a little note every single Friday saying, thank you for looking after the family. I think that's just so beautiful. I'll share something that happened literally last week. There was a lady who reached out that she wanted to go on a weekend, a Kesher Nafshi weekend. And we arranged the weekend was reduced to from £1,000, whatever it was, to about £200, and she gave us to understand that she'll work that out. And what happened was she was sitting there that night looking upset and down, and her son, her 15-year-old son, said, "Ma, what's up?" And she normally she said she doesn't normally share with him, but she felt she said, "I really want to go, I don't have the £200. And the next morning, he does like a paper round. He'd taken his own money and he put it in an envelope near her bed. And he wrote, "Dear Mum, thanks for looking after us, for being there in every way. You need to go." And she told me she was so desperate, she took the money and went. And obviously, when I heard, we reimbursed him. But these kids are incredible. The kids are incredible. And I would say at Mekimi, we don't want to, the greatest crime is to, so to speak, to mollycoddle or to stop their resilience. But, the kids shouldn't have to be that incredible. So I would say that the whole process is designed around support. You don't want to over-support. If you over-support, then you're almost, not enabling them to develop a resilience. I really believe it's such a privilege to work with these kids. I believe they are the future of the next generation. They are incredible. And you look around, you'll see people, who've done case studies on it, people who have been through these challenges. They blossom beautifully. So it's just an honor to be a part of their journey, to be in their car if they let. When they come, it's about assessing the situation. I'm going to come back to mentoring because that's a very core bedrock of what goes on. So every family is unique, but we'll assess what support's needed. Often there's a need for immediate financial support, and that's not just on a practical level. It's also on a level of organizational. There's so many bills, there's so many documents. Not everyone's skilled with that. Even those people who are skilled with that, it's a very overwhelming time dealing with the grief and the kids. And there's a saying that when one parent dies, some part of the other parent dies with them. And that's something we see a lot. I'll say that the widowers, the men, the almanas, the widows are incredible. But how brave can a person be? How brave can a person be? And so we'll come in and we'll try to offer across the board, from whether they'll need someone to help them, oversee the paperwork. The kids need someone to just be there with them to oversee. It may need liaising with the schools, etc. So many different dynamics. Yom Tov is such a hard time for these families. It just, you talk about my own void. I remember the week after was difficult, but then slowly you get used to a Monday and a Tuesday and a Wednesday without daddy. And then comes Shabbos. And his place is at the top of the table. And there's just no one sitting there. And every time you glance there, you don't want to glance there, but you glance there, it reminds you. And then after a time, you get used to Shabbos. As weird as it is to say, you do. And then comes Yom Tov or Pesach. It's going to be Hanukkah. Hanukkah time is, many of our families say it's the hardest time of all. Although I'll get in trouble for that because that's debatable. Some people will tell you Pesach, some people will say every day. We'll send intuitive packages. Let's say Hanukkah, every night they'll get a box. They get a big pile of 8 boxes before Hanukkah, and every night they'll get a box which they open by candlelighting. So that sort of is a distraction by candlelighting. And their boxes are designed in a way, let's say the first box has in it a Hanukkah tablecloth with some silly flashing Hanukkah headlights with maybe, and some 2 peas and a dreidel to play a game, and just to bring a bit of Hanukkah in the home. And every night it's got something else with it. And that's every Yom Tov will be there to just, someone's thinking of you, really about them feeling that there's someone there for them in so many ways. And we do trips which are beautiful, where we'll take them away to, a fun outing or stuff like that. And it's so beautiful to see how much it means to them to be around other kids who can relate. And our trips at Mekimi are absolutely not morbid. They are full of giggling, backslapping, jokes. They're the funnest trips, to be honest. Underneath, just when you look in each other's eyes for a second, you kind of know, and you're saying this unspoken message to each other. We're in it together. I can relate. And I think that gives the kids so much support and resilience.
Unbelievable. And it's all been designed, and all these ideas, they're all manifesting from people like yourself who have been through that journey, and you know what to look out for. You know what those gaps look like and how to fill them.
Absolutely, sir. I should mention, Mekimi was actually started by 3 people together. 2 wonderful ladies, Mrs. Devora Hummel and Mrs. Shani Kaufman, sisters and daughters of Reb Meir Lobenstein, Zechrono Livracha, who I may have seen him around, but I never met or knew, but I've heard what a sincere, authentic person he was. The real deal. Not looking for shortcuts, just Hatznei Aleches. I think I was at his kever a couple of weeks ago to say some Tehillim, and I think there was a pasuk there, something like Ma Hashem Shoel Me'emcha Me'emach Ki Emasoi Stakav Chesed. Just what's Hashem want from you? Just to get on, to do the life right, and to do an incredible amount of chesed and Torah in a discreet, dignified way. And I think he embodied that from all I've heard about him. His almana, his wife, Mrs. Bracha Lobenstein, has also been an incredible part in developing programming, especially for the almanas. She leads that section, and it's very special. Today it's far vaster. Our London branch was set up by Mrs. Pinky Zanga. It's another story for itself. After Danny Zeliger was very unwell with COVID, he reached out to the community, and she's taken an incredible lead, extremely selfless, how she's built an entire branch in London. There's over 100 kids in London who have signed up who for support. It's down to her selflessness. I think Claudia Stroll owed to her a lot. I can't not mention Bentzi Nussbaum. He runs the operations in Manchester with a heart that's so big. Dov Brody in London it's just amazing watching him connect with the kids, and they just see him as that big brother figure. Dina Sprung is incredible with the girls. It's actually nice that she's involved because her father, Nuchi, Oliver Shalom, he was a relative and he kept an eye out for me after my father was nifta. Ari Richmond, there's so many people. I'm just mentioning the people in the core team, but there's so many volunteers who I can't mention them each. And not just volunteers, but I have in mind 2 specific individuals who have helped me and held my hand with the organizational element. I owe them so much, and they won't want me to mention them by name, but I feel very blessed to have them in my life. It's not anymore just a little cute thing. It's vast, and it brings with it responsibilities.
Sure. I mean, being on the front lines, when you get a call that another family has just been dealt a blow, that one of the parents has been taken away too soon, what are those initial thoughts that go through your mind?
I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't an initial pain. I always, perhaps a little bit of my own sorrow coming up to greet that. I think that's a human side, and that's there. And really just feeling for them first of all. There's often a thought of, oh gosh, you know what's coming. They have no idea what's hit them. And then there's just a deep desire to want to try and ensure that they get the right support in the right way, in a delicate, respectful manner. I'll say that one of the nicest compliments we've ever received was that, many different people or organizations reached out, but we didn't feel safe. And something about the Mekimi approach enabled us to feel dignified, respected, which brings with it challenges because we're not out there. We're not putting out these ads, with a family and, there's the father blacked out with tears and kids and
Yeah.
And it's a challenge because being real here, the funding side could be very tricky because there isn't that direct approach. But I hope to be able to stay true to our values of treating the families with dignity and giving them their respect, their privacy, their anonymity.
Yeah, the charity is very much, it's known to those who need it and less so to those who don't. And when I launched this podcast over 12 months ago, within a few weeks, somebody from London reached out to me and said, you need to speak to Rabbi Aron Litwin. Like, there's something going on, but we just can't quite put our finger on it as to what it is. And it's literally my next question that I wanted to bring up to you. You tapped on it. The way you've brought your organization to market in such a sensitive manner. There's no aggressive campaigns like you've mentioned. You're consistently conscious of the fact that the people you are servicing are going to be seeing your content and seeing what you're putting out there. And it's very much first and foremost their needs, their respect, their dignity coming first. The struggle of furthering awareness about what you do, but you're trying to stay sensitive to the need. What are the real-time struggles that brings an organization like yours?
It's a question we're grappling with. There was a bit of to and fro in the Hamadiyah recently. A lady had written in that she'd lost her husband and she wasn't aware of any support. It was nice to see someone wrote back in, someone without us asking them. I didn't see the letter initially.
Right.
Someone wrote back in and said, hey, reach out to Mekimi. They're on ground. I'll tell you, it's crazy to think that in London, in Golders Green, in Edgware, Hendon, Manchester, Gateshead, there is no other organisation that is there to support families that have lost a parent at a young age. That it's mind-boggling. When I looked into becoming more established, I was like, there must be something out there. I could not believe it. I could not believe the void and the gap that was there. And it's tricky. I think our very essence is, because it's user-led, because everyone involved can relate, I think the top priority will always be the dignity of the families. I do think, though, very subtly and very respectfully, for example, the Yizka project,
Yes.
where, if you're coming there,
No, I wanted you to bring up what you've done. That idea was so sensitive, the way it was designed, the way it was placed, the way you embedded yourself in such a public limelight, but in such a gentle manner. I just thought it was an incredible move on your part.
Yeah, so it came from having sat there for many months on end, thinking, 1 second, we need there to be a better awareness, but we have our values. And how do you go about that? And then what happened was basically in shul, one of our kids was saying Yizkar, a girl, for her mother, from the Yizkar booklet. And there was an older lady who was standing next to her for Yizkar, who had lost her parent years before. And she's like, what is that? So she said, oh, it's this booklet. Where'd you get it from? And she's, can I use it? And she was like, yeah, I'm sure, I've finished, you can use it. And she called us up and she was like, I don't understand. This is something everyone needs. And then it just sort of clicked. Hey, this is a beautiful way, a subtle way. Does it everyone see it? No, because the people who don't see it aren't all going to pick it up. But many, many people picked it up, and the feedback's been incredible. I got from 5-year-olds in our families who really appreciate the Yizkar companion. I got a handwritten letter from a lady who's been saying Yizkar for 76 years. I think, if I remember correctly, her mum, I can't remember, passed away in a car crash when she was 11. So she's 87, I think that makes her.
Wow.
And she said she'd never understood or appreciated, been able to connect with it. It's crazy to think 76 years lacking. And that was a subtle way of making people aware who we are and bringing awareness. I hope that the people who are touched by our cause, reach out, come forward, because I'll say it as it is. To fund it in a dignified manner the way we want to it's a graft. It's hard work and it's a struggle. That's the reality. Yeah. So if someone's listening, don't just presume they're all taken care of. So much that we could do with support in many different ways, and we're open to it in the right manner.
Sure. There was a segment, I think, in this year's one about the Kinder Aros Minhag. And I smiled to myself when I read it, because I grew up in Stanfordville in the Stieflich, and it was always the same guy. The guy that would shout out Yalla V'Yovo was always the guy with a big smile on his face who would scream out Kinder. It was like a moment of excitement almost. But you saw the other side of that coin, that there's some children who aren't going to go out at this moment, and that needs to be done differently and better.
Yeah, we've had kids here in England, a few different occasions, who have almost been... Many times we've had kids where people say to them, out. And they're like, not sure what to do. They don't want to, they're almost these gorgeous kids. I'm saying these kids are incredible. They don't want to say, like, they could turn around and say, my father's dead. Some of them can do it. They're characters, the kids, trust me. You get out. Well, but we had one case, literally, they were manhandled. They said, no, you're not supposed to be, and sort of picked them up and took them out. And the kid didn't know what to do. So I think it's such an important point. I tell you, what struck me about it was interesting when I spoke to the Rachava, Rav Horowitz, who's one of the Adas Torahs. I will mention also Rabbi Sofa has been incredible in every area. When I struggle with, last night I had the most complicated scenarios, family scenarios that needed working through, and he's always makes himself available, and I am so indebted to him. I don't know, he wears so many hats, but he wears them all so well. Incredible asset. In London, we're privileged to have the help of Rabbi Diane Zimmerman. I will say that when I called Rav Horowitz, I said to him, because he also will understand the Hasidic mindset, say Kinder Aros. I said, is it the right thing to say? So he said to me, just to clarify, Kinder Aros is saying the kids in Yiddish. Kinder Aros, kids should get out before Yizkar. So he said to me, no, in my shul, he speaks in such a soft, regal manner. In my shul, we've stopped saying Kinder Aros. And he says, I'll tell you why. So I hadn't yet explained to him my concerns. So he said, because there's all the Yidden here with long white beards who have Baruch Hashem 2 parents, and to say Kinder Aros, calling them Kinder when they have to go out, it's not respectful. And I was chuckling to myself. I was like, wow. I was like, I've never thought about that dynamic, because I wasn't thinking of them. I mean, I'm sure they're great. And I had actually, when I've said that over, I had feedback from people saying, please call me a kid as long as possible until my beard's, white and plus. But obviously for us, it was about the kids not feeling that Kinder Aros, to rub that salt in the wound. Like, kids are supposed to be going out and you're stuck in here. And I think there's good people. Someone was just telling me the other day that he saw, someone just intuitively, giving a wink to one of the kids in the Yizkar. They don't always want you to come over and give them this whole, whatever. Like, kids want their space. It's a delicate balance of giving support in the manner that's wanted, but just a wink sometimes. Someone who can relate. Like, it was a beautiful moment. I was at a chuppah recently, very close with a chassan. It's always, by the way, I love going to the chassanas. It's very special watching them build their home. It's very, very special. And on the way down, the chassan he didn't want me to come over. I know that. He just gave me a wink and a little nod on the way down. And it was that kind of thank you. It was very beautiful. Really special.
You mentioned earlier about your desire to live a life of meaning and to find purpose, create something of yourself in an impactful way. Now, there's the commonly known Kubler-Ross model that lays out the 5 stages of grieving. And I think it's David Kessler who's now written a sixth, which is finding meaning as a process, the newest level of processing that grief. Would you say that is really at the core of any believing Jew? Like in any experience, especially during hard times of pain and loss, that finding meaning within the journey becomes very much part of the purpose. What has the wider world realized now that perhaps we knew inherently to be true all along?
Yeah, so very true. I think that is the Kubler Ross, and I think David Kessler, they're great. Their work is incredible. We actually have one of the resources we do. I haven't managed to cover everything, and there's so much more that's unsaid. But we have a magazine that goes out every month or so, every 2 months, every month and a half, around Yom Tov time, that the kids can relate to. And it's a beautiful magazine. So there's some really silly bits in, nonsense bits, because that's who we are. We want to also have that side. And then there's like the really raw side, where that kind of contrast of, we're not going to walk around moping, but yeah, there's an ache in our heart that we want to express too. My favorite part of the magazine is when the kids write in. It's called the Spotlight section, and they share their stories. And it's not always got this whole euphoric ending. Oh, and today I'm the CEO of da-da-da. But they're just saying, I'm here, here I am. And the other kids get so much support from it. We also we do spotlights of older people who have had, Baruch Hashem, successful lives. But one of the sections is what we call the grief section. And we delve into this, and we've done a really in-depth analysis of this model, the 4 stages of grief, the 5 stages of grief, and obviously the 6th stage, which I think, if I remember correctly, David Kessler wrote after he lost his son, which was very interesting. And I do think that's a bedrock in grief, but I do think, I'm a bit tempted to say, jump to the finding meaning, because I do think it's very much the 6th stage. I think that all the stages are important. I think it's important to try to find moments where, and I'm coming back to this concept again, it's just who I am, of just being real with where you're at. When we wrote this in the magazine, when we wrote a few articles about it, I kept saying, you can go in spirals, you can come back, you can revisit stages. Just because you've finished with a denial, it doesn't mean it's not coming back. It was interesting, while I'm talking to you, there was a certain realization of a grief I have in my kids not knowing their grandfather. It's not something I'm as consciously aware of, and I was just realizing while I'm speaking to you. So I think the stages are true. I think it is beautiful to get to a place of finding meaning, but it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that everyone in their challenge suddenly does something with it. I think sometimes just living a meaningful life within yourself and trying to be a good person, that's perhaps sometimes the greatest meaning of all.
Incredible. You've mentioned twice now about your children knowing the grandfather. Just last night I was preparing for this at home, and my oldest daughter, she asked me who I'm preparing for. And I told her, and then she was putting some dots together as to who your kids are. And after a minute, she said, so that means they never knew their grandfather. And it was just like a moment of like shock to her as a young child. And you've mentioned it a few times as a point as well.
Yeah, I guess it could be the stage I'm at in my life now where, Baruch Hashem, I'm blessed to have married, have children. And it could be, a stage now where they should be having that experience, and probably something I need to work through a little more. It's nice to hear that awareness of your kid, it's your daughter. It's nice to hear that people have that. And yeah, like you say, there's many faces and many elements to every angle.
I was going through my feed, my WhatsApp chat with you, which started over a year ago, September 2024, where I first reached out to you to see if we can have this conversation. And it was a busy time. It was Elul time, and you had a lot of family commitments, and it was Yom Tovim. And a month after that, you were blessed to bring in a beautiful baby boy into this world after 4 girls. Having a son after all those years, and just bearing in mind the context of the entire journey that you've just shared with us, how did this bring everything you've experienced from the age of 17, going through life, building a family, and then holding a berach of your own?
It really makes me emotional even thinking about it, and emotional in a good way. It's the greatest miracle. I'll share that. There's a book, one of the resources we give out to the families and the kids when they want to understand what they're feeling and to search for encouragement. It's an incredible book written by a lady called Miriam Ribiat, called I Wish Someone Would Have Told Me. And at the very back of the book, it's called, I think, Looking to the Future. It's the last chapter, and it's a few pages long. And in the chapter, there's a story about a lady who lost her father when she was very young. She describes how, eventually she got married, but she had girls. And she says all her siblings, had their kids and eventually had their son to name after the father. And she describes it was many years, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, she still didn't. And then she describes the moment that she was blessed with her son. She just describes the comfort. And I'll share with you that I remember a couple of weeks after Beirach was born, I remember sitting Friday night, and it's ironic because it was Shabbos, and I was, coming back to the beginning of the conversation, the very first Shabbos after my father was nifta, we didn't cry. But this Friday night, I was just sitting after the meal. I think my wife had gone out with the girls to like a Shabbos Kala, so I had a few minutes of real quality bonding time with Beirach on my lap, and I was singing hymns miras. It was almost, the full circle of that Shabbos. And I took out this book, and I put it on the table, and I started to read the story of this lady who finally held her son, and I could connect with every word, and I'm not proud of it, but this Shabbos, I did cry, holding Beirach close. It's hard to fully describe the level of nechama it brings every time I say his name, every time I see his delightful face. It's very special. It's hard to fully describe, but it makes you feel that, the legacy didn't end, and there's a very wholesome continuation. I'm aware while I'm saying this that, not everyone's got to that stage yet. I interviewed an incredible, incredible young lady who lives here in the community, who lost her mother when she was very young, and she's had 4 boys. So, we had a good chuckle about hoping, I had my 4 girls, and then Baruch Hashem was blessed with a son, and I hope for her, Mirz Hashem, I actually have her name, and I daven Mirz Hashem, she should be zeicha to have that feeling. But so many people I've spoken to have mentioned that moment of comfort, and it's hard to fully express how deep it is, and now's not quite the time, the platform, to express how much of a miracle it was to have this Beirach. It was a real bracha. But I will say that I guess my deepest wish for everyone is to get to that place where they're able to go to the chuppah, build a home of their own, and hold a little boy, a little girl, whichever it is, and name them after their parent, and see that nachas, feel that nechama that I was able to feel.
That is deeply moving and really beautiful. I want to end off hearing from you 2 different messages. The first message I want to hear from you is to the wider community. In broad strokes, what does the wider community need to understand when a family they know is going through such an experience?
So it's a good question. People should ask themselves an honest question, which is the support I want to offer because I want to be part of it or feel good in myself? And there's nothing wrong with feeling good with doing chesed. I think it's a beautiful thing. It's something I discussed a lot with Rabbi Litwin. But I think they should ask themselves a question. Am I reaching out for me or for them? If it's the first option, then maybe hold off. If it's the latter, I think sincere support, sincere offers is never wrong. There's no wrong in when someone's being real. It's I know it may be an interesting statement to say, but like I've said the wrong things many times. I've offered support when it wasn't always wanted. Everyone's made mistakes in life. There's no shame in that, but I've always found that when you're sincere and you can look the person in the eye and they can see that you just mean you're real, you're just being real with them, they'll almost never get angry or upset. It may have triggered them. They may have a cry because of it, and not belittling that. But I think when you're sincere, so I think the question you ask yourself is, do I want to just be involved in here and get a bit of yach to be able to go to shul or whatever and feel, I'm involved in that case, then maybe don't. But if you really care, do approach them. Do. People appreciate it. And I would say one point on that is offer specifics. Would you like me to do rota? Can I do the 4 p.m. rota? Can I make you supper on Tuesday night? I heard from a girl who shared that after her mother died, there was rarely supper at home. Her father wasn't the greatest culinary skills. And a neighbor said to her, she had many people said, yeah, come round. She never went anywhere. And someone said, would you come Monday? And she said she went for, I think, 10 years, Monday night to that house. And it started from one comment, come Monday. So I think do offer. I think it's people sometimes, to be too afraid, I don't want to say the wrong thing. Say the wrong thing. If you're sincere, they won't care. And offer specific support. Do offer. Don't presume people are okay. I'll say the same way. People may think, it's a good cause, it's a good charity, they're for sure got what they need. It's not the case. Do offer. If you're listening to this and you've got the means, please do reach out. There is a need, and offer specific. And
my greatest hope is that if this conversation can result in you getting the support, then that's a win. That's really powerful, very, very educational to an orphan or a child who may have gone through a struggle similar to what you have experienced. If you had the ability to close this conversation with a brief message for them, perhaps not sure what their next steps in their life are to be.
I'll share that when I started my training to become a therapist, I remember the very first session was with someone called Dr. Justin Resnick. Great guy. And what he did was he said, right, everyone, I want you to think of the biggest challenge you've been through in your life. Write it down. Gave everyone a few minutes. And it's something you could do if you're listening. You could think of the greatest challenge. And then he said, if you had the ability to completely erase the challenge from your life, just as if it never happened, would you do it? And it's quite a complex question, I get that. But out of the whole group, I think there was 30 of us, only 2 people said they would. I would do anything I could to see my father again. I always say there's a poem I wrote a few years ago expressing my feelings, it's called Daddy, If I Could See You One More Time. And, the poem goes on to say, I just want one more hug. So, of course, I'd love to bring him back and have one more hug. And Mitzvah Hashem we will with Mashiach very soon. But there's no question that it defines who I am, the challenges I've been through. And I don't just mean that in the sense that Mekimi exists. I mean it in my nature. I mean it in my appreciation for every minute of every day. I mean it in my desire to live a life of meaning. I just mean it in who I am. And I think it's true for most people. When a person's in a moment of intense pain, they can't fully see that. But our struggles define us. And my message to the kid would be, to every kid, and I try to convey this message as often as I can. You are incredible. You are the future. The abilities you have are going to make a difference to the world and to your life. So don't huddle up and dig deep underground and burrow away. Let your light shine. Embrace life. And yeah, of course it's dark now. And if it's dark now, just find someone who can relate to that darkness. But this challenge is a beautiful part of you that's going to make a light that shines very bright.
That's really powerful. Rabbi Aron, I cannot thank you enough. If I may, I just want to end off with a very brief anecdote, which I just saw as a direct moment of hashgacha. This morning I was in shul learning, and I was about to leave, and I thought, let me just brush ahead another few lines. Something I never do, but I just thought, let me just scrub through the next 10 lines or so, and then I'll come back to it tomorrow. And the last segment of the first perek of Sota, and the Gemara asks that there's a posuk that says that a person should follow in the ways of God, should follow in the ways of the Shekhinah. And the Gemara asks, how's that possible? The Shekhinah is compared to Eishei Chela, something which is a all-consuming fire. How is it possible to follow God? And the Gemara lists a few ways of how one can follow the ways of Hashem. And 2 of those 4, one is burying the dead, and one is bringing nechama to Avelim, to people who have lost a loved one. And I just thought, there was no reason why I was on that daf. I literally just skimmed ahead a few lines, and it was a few hours before we sat down, and just reading those words, that the way to follow God, what you're doing it's an act of God. It's a godliness behavior to be able to have a heart and to see what other people are going through, and to find and think of ways to sensitively help them through that journey and come out the other side healthy, intact, strong and courageous is something which you should be tremendously proud of.
Well, that's beautiful. And you may have wanted the last word, but you're not getting it so easy. No, if you've shared that, I'll share that a few weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago, really, really having a difficult moment. Really just in the fundraising, to be honest, it was really a struggle. I was really down from it. And I got up, went to mikveh, went to shul, and I went straight to the Meister Rosh Yeshiva's keva. And I actually wasn't even there for very long, but sometimes you're there for a few minutes, and it really davened my heart out. I went to also daven by Rabbi Asher, Diane Westheim, who was someone that I miss deeply, someone who really a father to Klal Yisrael. And I actually went, I said a little capital to him by a lot of the parents of the families that that are our friends. And I didn't make an explicit Kabbalah to be mechazik in Shmir Salashan, but I decided after that it would be appropriate to learn some Shmir Salashan. So I literally started a few weeks ago, and this morning, literally, I'm on my own cycle. I'm not on the official. This morning, he was going through the different lavin that a person transgresses when they speak Lashon Hara. It said, if you speak Lashon Hara about a Yasam or Almana, then you're over. And it said something so powerful. It said, afilu osher, even if they're wealthy. And I thought it was incredible. I was like, what? It's a funny thing to put in there. And I looked in the commentary, the Chofetz Chaim writes there, that grief, he says there that the pain in a person's heart, it doesn't matter their situation. There's a certain unique, nuanced support that's needed there. And I just thought it was very appropriate because, yeah, many other families, the reality is when there's only one breadwinner, and if they're able to be a breadwinner, there's a financial element to it as well. But even those who, the few who are Baruch Hashem financially stable, then there's just recognizing it doesn't matter who you are, where you are. When you're missing someone, it hurts. And I think that people listening, regardless of their age, stage, or where they're up to in life, I think they'll be able to relate to the pain of loss. It could be a friend, could be a parent, could be a grandparent, could be someone who was close to them. It's something that you miss. It's something that's just different. The difference between life and death is something you can't fully prepare for. It's a hope that people can find Mekimi as a place to connect and hopefully revitalize, to be able to live their life to the fullest afterwards.
Beautiful. Rabbi Aron, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
All the best. God. I thought it was important to add a small anecdote just to help frame my takeaway from this conversation. After I switched off the mics and we parted ways after this conversation, I was just trying to reflect and get my head around what I'd just experienced. I think what I was struggling most with was trying to understand how Aron Litwin has spent 20 years dealing with the loss of his father, 20 years since a huge impact shook his world. And although his emotions and experience are still very raw and still very much alive and with him, and it's something he clearly deals with every day, he's also in a completely different space where he's able to help people, built an organization that supports hundreds of families across the UK going through exactly what he went through when he was a young child. And I was just trying to put together these two ideas. How can somebody still be so close and so in touch and so in tune with what he had experienced, and at the same time be so healthy and so removed from it that he can be in a place to pull other people out? And this was going through my mind Thursday, Friday. And Friday night, I sat down and I opened a Chumash, and the parasha of the week that I recorded this with Aaron was Parshas Vayetze. And the Pasuk describes that Yaakov lay down to sleep, and Hashem came to him and gave him a blessing. What was the blessing? The blessing was that your children will be ka'afar ha'oretz, like the dust of the earth. And immediately the Pasuk continues and says, Ufaratzta yomo v'kedmo. They will disperse and spread and multiply and be fruitful. The word afar is a derogatory term. It's a term of dust. It's a term of lowliness, a term of suffering. That's one point to recognize. The other point to recognize, and the Kliyako raises this as a question, why does Hashem promise Yaakov that the children will spread Yom V'Kedmo? He gives opposites. They'll go from top to bottom, from right to left. Why not just go in a circular form? What's going on? Why is it framed in opposites? And he explains that Afar is the lowliest place. It's a place of suffering. It's a place of darkness. And it's at that moment in time when a person is in a dark place, when a person is going through a struggle, when something isn't going quite right. That's the point where he recognizes Hashem. That's the point where he realizes that the only way to come out of this intact, to come out of this healthy, to come out of this strong, is that recognition that God is the only person who can get him out of it. And at that moment in time, it's not necessarily a gradual process to climb out of that space, but it's a boomerang. It takes you from the lowest point right to the highest point. It's that moment of absolute clarity. And the blessing that Hashem was giving to Yaakov was that when your children will be ka'afar ha'oretz, when they're at the lowest breaking point, that's when ufaratz yom v'kedma, they're going to be able to spread from opposite extremes. They're going to be able to go from the lowest point to the highest point. And I thought that really frames who Aron Litwin is, where he is, and how he's able to achieve what he's achieving. That ability to live in two places at once. He hasn't let go of the pain. He hasn't let go of the shock. That trauma is very much what drives and what shapes the way he thinks and feels, and what enables him to understand exactly what other children are going through. And through that, to build an organization with other people of our community, of the community in London, to really be there, to really be in the moment of what these children are experiencing, to be able to be this light tower soaring high above into the heavens, and to look down and to create a path out of that moment for these children to move on and to grow up and to build successful, productive, happy, healthy lives for themselves. And it's with that thought, an idea, an understanding, appreciate that somebody can be very much in a space and very much be out of it at the same time. It's not a contradiction. And it's really the framework, what shapes Mekimi, what shapes the work they're doing, who it's built by and who it's built for. And the work they are achieving is something remarkable. Listeners will appreciate and go through this conversation and come away with an understanding as to what this very quiet organization is achieving, what they're achieving very much behind the scenes, discreetly, very sensitively. And it's my greatest hope that as a result of this conversation, awareness should be raised. People should appreciate to rally behind them, to give them what they need so that they can continue doing the amazing work they are doing. I hope you enjoy this conversation.